Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of FML Talk. Happy April, everyone. As some of you may or may not know, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And to honor our first episode in April, I am so excited because we have Kelly Randis on FML Talk today. I cannot wait for you guys to hear this powerful interview of her speaking on all the things that she went through as a child and how she has not only healed and overcome them, but become a freaking superhero to so many other survivors out there. So sit back, grab a drink, and welcome to FML Talk.
Oh my God. Wait, how old was the other girl?
19. Can you believe that shit?
Hey, this is Gabrielle Stone.
Good book?
He did what?
48 hours?
What a dick.
Yeah, but have you seen all the photos on her Instagram?
And this is FML Talk.
Oh, no, she didn't.
So if you do not know who Kelly Randis is, her pen name or author name is K.L. Randis, and she wrote the best-selling book, Spilled Milk. I know her on a personal level because she is my mentor, and she was the person that convinced me that not only was self-publishing a potential route, but it was the route that I should end up going. And it completely changed my life, and she mentored me through the entire process and is really the reason that you are all holding a copy of Eat, Pray, FML in your hands. And I'm so incredibly thankful to her on a personal level, but she is one of the most incredible women I have ever come into contact with. She not only went through what no child should have to go through, her story is so incredibly compelling. The fact that she then wrote it into a book that is helping so many people around the world who have dealt with sexual abuse or have had someone that they're close with go through something like that. She has helped so many people with this book, with her advocacy work, and I am so freaking honored that she wanted to come on FML Talk to share her story with you guys. So without further ado, please welcome Kelly Randis. Miss Kelly, welcome to FML Talk. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's kind of wild that we've come to this like stage in our relationship because, as I mentioned in the intro, you're so much more than just a best-selling author to me. You're my mentor, and I kind of, am indebted to you for convincing me to go over the cliff of what seems so scary in the self-publishing world.
Yeah, it's kind of wild that this is like really the only way that we've ever met face to face, so to speak, is like via video chatting.
That's
like,
right.
We've never actually, because then COVID happened, so like we never actually got a chance to meet in person. But yeah, I totally feel the same way. It's like we're really good friends, but like virtually,
but have never met. Yeah, it's so weird. Every time you say it, I'm like, oh, that's right, we've never actually met
in person. Yeah,
we've had like a 2.5 year relationship now that's all been over the phone, which is so weird. But before we jump into your story, because it's so powerful, I want to encourage everyone to go follow Kelly on TikTok, on Instagram, because I love watching your stories because you're so funny. Like, I don't think people realize, because, your books are heavy and so impactful, but you're really fucking funny. Like, I cackle out loud when I listen to some of your Instagram stories sometimes.
Yeah, so I chalk a lot of that up to like having a sense of dark humor and a lot of sarcasm, and I really do feel that has like a lot to do with like the way that I grew up and like my whole backstory of like abuse and stuff. But it's kind of my way of like deflecting as an adult and as a person, and I think it has contributed greatly to my level of sarcasm and dark humor over the years, for sure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And my humor is dark and sarcastic and kind of similar to yours.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So let's jump into really just your story, which obviously is what your best-selling book Spilled Milk is about. But I want to go back and just kind of have you take us through your childhood so people can really understand what a fucking survivor you are and what you've gone through in your life?
Yeah, sure. So my pen name is KL Randis. Obviously, Kelly is what I go by publicly. And I penned a novel about my upbringing and my childhood because I grew up in a very sexually and physically abusive home, as well as emotionally abusive. So what I found when I first prosecuted my father, who was my abuser, was that there was a really serious lack of literature on what it was like for a child specifically to have to go through the court system. And you could find books about abuse and you could find books about like the healing process after the fact, but there wasn't a whole lot that took you like through that A part, through that B part, and that C part, because I feel like they are just so all like closely connected in the whole journey of that. So essentially what wound up happening was, since I've kept journals since I was like 5 years old, I took my journals after he was sentenced and kind of put them together kind of for my own healing, really, to just kind of have everything in one spot and to kind of like be able to write it all down and like get it all in one spot. And that is essentially like the rough draft of what Spilled Milk became. And I let my husband read it, and my intentions of it originally were to like literally just write it all out and put it in a closet and kind of just forget about it for my purposes. And my husband, if for lack of better words, was like, basically you would be doing the world a really big disservice if you didn't let other people read this, because I think it's going to help a lot of people. And that's what happened. Like it's like the craziest story of like, so simple. It's like literally just what I went through, the fact that I kept journals throughout this entire thing and then wanted to put that to paper for myself, but then had somebody else read it off, and their outside perspective is what let them like kind of let me know like, hey, this might help other people too.
Yeah. And when you decided to publish it, you guys were homeless at the time, correct?
So when I first met my husband, yes, we were both homeless. So I was living out of my car. We were 17 years old. And when I met my husband, what I didn't know about him was that he was also homeless. And his parents had just recently got a divorce and they were living out of a motel. So what was funny is when we first started dating, neither one of us was like, hey, do you want to come to my house and like watch a movie? Or like, do you want to come meet my family at my house? Or like, can I drop you off after school? Like there was none of that, because we were always like, do you want to go to a movie? Do you want to meet at a park? Like we were always trying to find like public spaces, but we didn't realize we were both doing it at the same time for the same exact reason. So I specifically remember like meeting his mother for the first time, and it was literally as they were moving into, she was finally able to like get the money up to get an apartment. And it was literally the day that they were moving in was like the day that I met his mom.
Oh my God. That's wild. So when was it that you officially decided to just put it up online and publish it?
So I originally sent it out once like I had that discussion with my husband, Mark. I originally sent it out to, I want to say anywhere between like 8 to 12 publishing houses. I would say half of them were like, the big 5 publishing houses, like, the author's dream of like, okay, if these people sign me, that would be amazing. I did hear back from one of the big 5, and they basically told me that although it was written really well, they just didn't feel like there was an audience for that topic of book. So they were like, listen, it's written really well, but we just don't think that people are going to buy this, and we don't think that it's going to sell. So it's a no for us. And I sat on that for a little while, and this is when indie publishing was like kind of like grassroots. Like not a whole lot of people were doing it. If they were doing it, there was kind of this whole separate world of like vanity presses, which had like a really, really bad name because it was like basically publishing house hybrids where people would take your money and say, oh yeah, like, we'll market you and we'll get your transcript, really good. And, we'll get your book out there. But they essentially just take your money and they, wind up publishing your book. So there were a lot of scams out there at the time. So I did a lot of research on what it would be like to just publish my own book and not go through a vanity press, not go through a traditional publishing, house or anything. And that's where Spilled Milk was born. And I was like, okay, well, I'll create the cover because we didn't have the money at the time. I designed my own cover originally, and I made the manuscript the best that I could. And I kind of worked with what I got via Google and YouTube videos. And that's where it was born. And I said, hey, even if like just a couple people pick this up, that'd be really cool. And I specifically remember the very next morning waking up to a text message from my one girlfriend who still lived in New York. And she was like, hey, you're a #1 bestseller. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, yeah. She's like, get on Amazon. Like, your book is the #1 bestseller. And it was the #1 book in its category on Amazon. And it has literally sat there for the last 8 consecutive years.
Damn straight it has, and take
Yes.
that, Big Five publishers.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love it. It's so indicative of this business in publishing and in film and TV, where people are like, oh, we just don't think that's going to sell. When I was
Right.
shopping Eat, Pray, FML, they were like, we just think you should tone it down a little bit. It's a little racy, and like, that's what everybody
Right.
loves about it. So
Right.
let's go back now so people can really understand your story, and tell me about what your dynamic was like at home, when the abuse started, and kind of like what your journey was before prosecuting your dad.
Sure. So I think it's important to preface this by saying that I actually have in real life I have 5 brothers and a sister, so there's 7 of us total. For purposes of writing the book, though, I knew going into it that I didn't want to make it a memoir specifically, because I knew that at the point, that it was getting published, and like at the point that it was actually getting pen to paper, I was in a very different place mentally and healing wise than any of my siblings were. I also wanted to make sure that I was giving them like the respect and privacy that like they still needed for that journey. Because I was in a different place, because I'd already been going counseling for quite a while at that point. So, I mean, we grew up in a very poor neighborhood in New York City. We lived in like, when I think about it now, I think I had once looked up the house and it was like something like 600 square feet. It was like a little shack on a little side road. And it was 3 bedrooms and, 6 kids at the time, because my youngest brother, he was born up here when we moved to Pennsylvania. And it was, my parents, and that was just kind of, I feel like what a lot of us were growing up in my neighborhood. Like, we came from a very physically and sexually abusive home, emotionally abusive, financially abusive to my mother. And it was just kind of common, which is sad. So like, it wasn't until my family relocated to Pennsylvania that I had started to see those red flags of like, okay, maybe our lives aren't so typical. And, maybe like, we would watch movies and it would be like, oh my God, like that family, look at them laughing all the time and playing with each other and like getting along. Like that doesn't happen in real life. Like clearly we know what happens in real life because I was living it, So it was not until we moved to Pennsylvania and I started getting friends and outside perspectives as like a teenager that I started realizing a lot of like red flags that were happening in my life.
Yeah. Do you remember how old you were when the first, I guess, physical and sexual abuse began to you personally?
Yeah, so the cover of my book specifically, the reason why I chose that cover image is the little girl that's on the front of the book is actually me when I was, I want to say around 4 or 5 years old. That's my first memory of it. I don't know whether or not it was happening prior to that. Like, I just have no recollection of it. But, like, the youngest that I could remember is, like, 4 or 5 years old.
Okay. And that was the sexual and physical abuse?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, the physical abuse, like, was always there. The sexual abuse was just always there. Obviously, it progressed the older I got in terms of, like, violence or, like, whatever it was and intensity. But I like specifically remember being like, which is like horrible for me to say now as a mother to 2 girls, but like the age that my youngest daughter is at right now, like I specifically remember being like right around that age.
Oh God, I can't even imagine. And you were the oldest of your siblings?
So I have one older sibling. I'm the oldest girl though, and there's only 2 of us. So like I was like the mother hen of all my siblings. And I think that's why like I kind of adapted this really like motherly kind of protective role within my family, because in a really great sense was almost like forced to become like a little young mother at the time. I didn't know this at the time, and I actually haven't I don't think I publicly spoke about this since, because I know that, like there's a lot that has happened in my personal family life in the past year, but my mother died. And looking back on my childhood now and like having to have gone through like so many pictures and stuff, like we knew that there was like something up with my mom, but like obviously as a child, I didn't actually know like what it was until I was a teenager and like an adult. But like she was a full blown addict, addicted to opioids. And like I had no idea until I was much older. So now looking back on things, even now, it's like there are so many more things that make more sense about like just our relationship or the way she treated us or the way that like the family dynamic, how it was like able to just go on for so long without people realizing, because like even my mother's perspective of things was not even 100% most of the time. And now I'm realizing that like as an adult, like, okay, it's because she was addicted to drugs. So.
Right. And I don't know if we're comfortable going here, but you recently found some information while you were trying to handle her affairs once she died. Are you comfortable talking about that?
Yeah. I won't dive into like super specifics about it. Like I honestly haven't even gone through the majority of it myself. But yeah, so she recently passed in June. So we have spent June of last summer, but we have spent the better half of, the year just kind of getting her estate things kind of figured out. And I took the lead role on that as well, which was kind of like a surprise to me when she asked me if I would become the person to do that for her for all of her end of life things, because like at the time we had kind of been I guess like estranged. Like we, I spoke to her when it was necessary, but for the most part we didn't really have much of a relationship. So I took the lead role on that, and what I wound up finding at her house was basically letters that were written to my father and to her from jail, and like other little things that she had just kept over the years, like actually like things that I had written when I was a child, very blatantly like calling this out. And she literally kept it in a shoebox, so it was all together in one spot, all of these letters and things that like basically like, damned him in what he had done. And I don't know if it was just like her way of reminding herself or her way of like keeping these literally locked away. There were recordings that we had found. So it was all very, very hard. I can honestly say that this past year, in addition to everybody just having to deal with COVID and the world literally just shutting down for how long, was probably one of the hardest that I've ever had to endure, minus testifying against him when I was younger.
Right. Because you basically more or less by finding all that realized that she knew and didn't do anything. Right. Yep. As a mother, as an adult now, it's like that's a hard pill to swallow. Like I don't care how old you are. And I always kind of had like I never like asked her like, straight out, like, did you know? Like we never had that conversation. We obviously had like a very complicated relationship to even like address that question kind of straight out. I always had my thoughts about it, but like it was never ever confirmed. So the fact that like I had physical papers in my hand, like in her own handwriting, like letters that she wrote like to me about the subject, was a really, really hard pill to swallow. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that. Cause it's like you go through your life not being protected by your father, who's
right.
supposed to protect you. And then you come to find out after you've done so much work on yourself and so much healing that the woman that was supposed to protect you actually knew and didn't do anything. Like
right.
that's heartbreaking
yeah.
I can't even imagine swallowing that.
It really is.
So tell me about the moment that you decided you were going to speak out and say something, and how you got from being in the house in those conditions to ending up prosecuting him in court.
Okay. So there were a lot of little things, like when I basically started making the transition like into like my teenage years. We had moved to Pennsylvania. I know now because that was his way of controlling, like literally my entire family had lived in New York. So I think like his only way of like kind of getting us away from other people so that like he could do what he wanted to do and not have to own up to anything was to physically move his family as far away as he could. And that's exactly what he did. And, you know, we literally had no family in Pennsylvania, like, you know, that we were like super close with. Like there was no, you know, for a very long time, he was still commuting back and forth to New York for his job. So there was literally outside of that, there was like no reason why we had moved to Pennsylvania to begin with. And I feel like when I kind of started like transitioning into like that teenage stage years of my life, like I started seeing a lot of inconsistencies with the way that I had a relationship with my parents versus the way that I saw my friends having relationships with their parents. And I understand when you're a child, you may not have, you know, the ability to like just have a sleepover whenever you want, or, you know, have certain control over things, because as parents, you obviously want to protect your children. But when you become a teenager and you are growing in the sense of like independence, you start to realize that, okay, are they doing this because they're protecting me, or are they doing this because they're hiding something, or because something is inconsistent with the way that they're parenting me and they don't want me to find out by going to another friend's house or having a sleepover, or, you know, really like allowing myself to be exposed at all. So there were little things throughout like my teenage years. It honestly didn't hit me super hard though until my first boyfriend. And I think there's a lot to be said about the kind of, you know, father I had who was sexually abusive, in me getting a first boyfriend, and that kind of being the caveat to him really starting to crack down on things because he didn't want me to have a relationship outside of what he wanted to control. And me saying, well, no, I'm a teenage girl. I like this boy and I want to, you know, be in a relationship with this boy. So it wasn't until meeting him and his family that really kind of kicked things off. And specifically, and you know, it's not too much of a spoiler, but the name of the book is called Spilled Milk. And the reason for that is because I was literally sitting at his kitchen table with his family and his brother had spilled a glass of milk at the dinner table. And it's such a small thing, but I think that when you come from a family that's like physically abusive and you are just so used to reacting in a sense that like you're always fearful, it's hard to not react to situations like that. And I'm sure a lot of your audience that's listening, you know, if they came from similar homes, they're going to be able to relate to that. When a glass is spilled at the dinner table, like somebody's going to get in trouble or hit, or somebody's got to run. There's going to be a big commotion. So I had jumped up from the kitchen table and I was like, oh my God, you know, I loved his little brother just as much as, you know, I loved him at the time. So it's like, I don't want, you know, his little brother to get hurt. So I like ran to the kitchen to try to get paper towels, but I was also like kind of frozen, and like everybody's literally just sitting there staring at me and they're like, it's fine. Like, it's okay. Like, it's just a glass of spilled milk. Like, we're just going to clean it up, get him another glass. It's not a big deal. Meanwhile, my heart's going like a million miles per hour because I'm in like fight or flight mode, and I had nowhere to put it. Like, I had nowhere to like put this energy. So that's like the most vivid like thought in my head when I think like, where was the turning point here? Because I literally had to walk outside after that, like at the end of dinner, and take a minute, because it was just like so emotional for me that I really realized in that moment, like, okay, not all parents are like this. All family dynamics are not like the one that are in my house. Like, there's something very wrong here.
Yeah, definitely. And so that was the turning point. When was it that you were like, I need to get help? I need to speak out and say something? Like, who was the person that helped you do that?
I had, at the time, it was my boyfriend's mother, who was just like a massive support to me, just in general. She's just like a wonderful person. And I had mentioned to her kind of in passing that I thought maybe I would want to go to counseling. And, you know, she just kind of like nonchalantly asked like, oh, you know, what for? And I didn't really like tell her too much, but she had met, you know, my parents several times. And I think just her keen sense of like, you know, spidey senses as like a really great mom was, I think that there's something going on here, but I can't quite put my finger on it. So I had mentioned to her that I brought the subject up with my mother, and she was like, you know, no, you know, I can't take you counseling. We don't have the money for that. Like, you don't need counseling anyway. You're fine. You know, again, like that whole deflection of not wanting me to speak to people outside of our, you know, own family unit. And she just kind of like looked up a crisis center in our town and was like, hey, like I found this place. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. They do counseling, and, you know, you can go there. And At the time, I hadn't been driving yet. Like I didn't even have like my permit at that point. So I was like, okay, well, how am I going to get there? And she offered to drive me. And she's like, if you want to make an appointment, I will absolutely pick you up, drive you there. No questions asked. We don't have to talk about what you talk about when you go in there. Like, just, let me know if you kind of want me to set this up for you. So she set up my first appointment initially and drove me to my first counseling appointment at this crisis center. And after leaving there, I was going anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week after that.
Wow. That's amazing. So she literally, swooped in and kind of was your saving grace at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like she really sensed that something was like really wrong.
Yeah.
Especially when she would bring up the topic of my parents. And it was like, I just didn't know how to talk about what was going on in my house, like at all with anybody, because nobody had ever asked. And that's kind of the crazy thing. Like, she was really the first person to ask the question, is everything okay in your house? Because when you think about it, it's not really something you ask somebody unless there's a really good reason to do so. Your girlfriends or your best friends from high school or, your colleagues at work, like you don't say to somebody just randomly like, oh, hey, are things cool at home? Like, are you being hurt? Like, is somebody touching you? It's not really a topic that people just kind of jump into unless they see something. But then even then there's like that bystander effect where everybody feels that somebody else is going to bring it up. They don't have to. Like, it's not my problem. I don't know them well enough. There's always like that kind of bystander effect that happens too. So in my case, I was very lucky that the person that I was dating at the time, their mother was, very genuine, very sweet, noticed something, didn't know quite what it was, but had at least the capacity to say, you don't have to talk to me about this, but why don't we find somebody you can talk to about this?
Yeah. And so was it the counselor at the crisis center that was like, okay, you need to step forward and say something, and convinced you to have the courage to do that?
I think it was a combination of things. It was a combination of me getting to the age where I really had to seriously start applying to colleges. So I was like in that mindset of being the protector of my siblings and wanting to get away for myself, but wanting to not ever leave them because I felt that they weren't safe around just him, because I was the protector and I was the one who kind of kept things together. It was a combination of me having, in the book, her name is Gina, my boyfriend's mother, that was just so caring and supportive of me in getting me to these counseling sessions. It was the counseling sessions where I learned about a plethora of things that I had no idea even existed, like financial abuse and emotional abuse and just physical abuse. And it just went so outside of all the things that we ever educate any children about in like the public school system. So I think when all of those things kind of came to a head, and I have been going counseling for quite some time, it seemed a lot less scary to say something at the time I did, because I had all of these moving parts of like a support system around me where I felt comfortable enough to say something in knowing that like the entire like world that I was living in wasn't just going to come crashing down.
Right. And so you step forward, you end up saying something. What was the process by the time you guys got into court? Like, how old were you? What were you dealing with? What were your parents' reactions?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was still in high school. So it was difficult because you already have, high school kids. Like they just naturally are high school kids. So like the way that they treat each other and whatever. I specifically remember going to the police station and making the report, and the police officer, kind of like giving advice about like, we can't, obviously you can't kidnap your kids, but if you were to just like go on a vacation for a week and go stay with your sister in New York, and maybe your phone dies and you forget to turn it back on while we conduct this investigation to initially like just get things rolling, like maybe that's something you could do. So we essentially wound up like leaving the state that night. Like we packed bags, got in the car, went to New York, and
who's we?
Oh, I'm sorry. Like my siblings, my mom.
Okay.
So from the police station, which I went to the police station with my one aunt was like up in the area, but it was with her, and then it was with Gina, with my boyfriend's mom. Like that was the person that, essentially when it came down to it, like she was the person that was in the room when I first said something, like anything at all. And that was like a huge like release, and it was like super emotional for everybody. And the first thing that we did was go to the police station to make, the statement. And so we wound up packing ourselves up, and going to stay with my aunt. And, you know, we found out later that like, not only had he called the place that I had worked at the time, because I had a telemarketing job that I was working at the time. He had called a bunch of my friends. He had called family members to ask like where we had gone. He was really trying to figure out like, okay, is this it? Like, I think that he kind of knew like, okay, my entire family's gone. That's a lot of kids. Like at this time, there's 7 of us. So like there's a bunch of kids here, like to just all go missing and like not say anything. So that was what happened when I initially told. And then when I wound up coming back, I specifically remember because like the police basically told us like, don't pick up your phone. If he calls, don't tell anybody where you're going. Cause we didn't want like an instance where like he became violent or like showed up and like threatened or did anything. Cause we didn't know how he was going to react once the police were involved. So when we wound up going back to Pennsylvania, I had friends that were like, oh my God, we had no idea where you went. Like, this is crazy. And I thought it was kind of weird because I wasn't gone so long that like I felt people should really be missing me to that level. So I later found out that at the time I had a few people in like the front office of like the school. We were like a small rural Pennsylvania town. So a few of the people who had worked in the front office knew me because like their daughters or their sons were friends with me, and they told their sons and daughters what was going on because the front office had to get notice from the police that like if he were to show up at the school, they were not allowed to like release us to him. So they knew what was going on, and it's just a small town and people talk, and that's just what happens like specifically in my area. So like I had kids knowing without me knowing that they knew what was going on in my house, which was like kind of crazy. So that's how the majority of people in my grade found out, especially if they were very close to me at the time. It wasn't even through me. It was like through their parents telling them what was going on.
How irresponsible of people that are working at the school and a front desk to like not keep that information private. Like, what is wrong with you?
You would think, or I mean, like at least like if you were to have the conversation like with your child, because like maybe they were just concerned, like, but just don't say anything. Like bring up my name and be like, oh, you know, how is Kelly? Like, how's she doing? Like, you know, have you talked to her lately? You know, kind of thing. But yeah, that got blown, you know, pretty big out of the water, like almost immediately. And then it didn't help that again, we were in such a small town that like it was in the newspaper all the time. And like we have reporters standing outside the courthouse. So, like we always had to go around the back, and it was a lot. I mean, I was a teen, I was in high school. Like it was, you know, something that I was dealing with on top of like trying to graduate and just like get my driver's license and, you know, figure out what college I would maybe want to go to. So, you know, it was a lot of like hard life at a very young age.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. And there was a moment where you were in the courthouse, like getting ready to go testify, and which I can't even imagine doing with your father sitting in the courtroom. And you had your flashcards for your final exams in your pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. The DA thought that was like, I like looking back on it now, like it's really funny. It wasn't at the time, but like, that's kind of like, when I do a lot of speaking events about like advocacy work for child abuse, that's like the one thing that I like to bring up is that like, because people ask all the time, they're like, well, how am I supposed to know that a kid is going through this? And how am I supposed to like recognize the signs here? And I was like, if anything, the worst person in terms of like being able to actually pick it out, because I was a straight A student. At one time I was a cheerleader. I held a job. I had friends. I had a boyfriend. Like I had all these moving parts that literally pointed in no direction that there was something really, really bad at home. But that's also just how I cope. Like I turned to hyper focusing my attention on my schoolwork and on like milestones that I wanted to accomplish. Whereas the textbook example of what a child looks like when they're going through similar situations is they're in trouble with the law. They are doing drugs. They don't have, you know, good friend groups in, you know, high school, and they're always getting into trouble. And I'm trying to shift that perspective of like, an abused child shouldn't look or act a certain way, especially when it comes time to testify against that abuser. Because when you put a child up on the stand who's like me, who is studious and, you know, had friends and did all the things right, quote, you know, the jury is more than willing going to look at me and say, okay, like this is a good witness. We believe her because she does all these things right. which is wrong because they should have been looking, and they did look at my siblings and say, well, this person is in trouble with the law, and this sibling is also in trouble with the law, and this sibling's in trouble with drugs. So how are we supposed to believe them? So it's like they want children to look like abused children, like via like what a textbook says they should be acting and looking like, but then we don't want to believe them when we put them up on the stand to testify against the abuser. They only want to believe you if they're like a good student and they're good, you know, they're a good moral person and all these things. And so it's like, it's like a catch-22 with like the whole issue that I have with like a lot of things that go on in the court system.
Yeah. And so there were 2 trials for you, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so take me through why that had to happen and like what went through with the first and the second.
Sure. So you have like your preliminary trial, and that's essentially where they're like gathering evidence and they're interviewing people and figuring out like who the witnesses are going to be and all that fun stuff. The process does take a lot longer than I ever thought it would. Like, obviously when you're watching like Law and Order or something, it's like, oh, like they get the guy and then they're interviewing him and then like all of a sudden he's in handcuffs and he's in jail, and it like, you know, wraps up by the end of the episode, and it makes it seem as though it's all within like a week's time. Right. I would say from the time that I went to the police station and made my statement to the time that we had ended the first trial, which wound up being a hung jury, so I'll explain that in a second, was probably a year and a half. So it was a pretty long time. They can do a lot on their side, from the defendant's side, like his side, to delay things, appeal things, drag things out. You know, they have all sorts of things that they try to do to like kind of just delay the process. So the reason why we had 2 trials was because the first one was a hung jury. And what that means is that the jury could not come to a cohesive decision. There was some juror within their pack that was basically saying, I'm not going to budge. I'm not going to change my mind about this. There's no way you can convince me. But obviously we know that unanimously they have to come to a collective decision about that person. I remember being in the courthouse and like kind of looking around, and like there were like a lot of nervous looking faces. So I feel like the people like around me kind of knew more what was going on than I did at the time, because I specifically remember sitting like in the stand, like, you know, behind the judge, and they came out and they're like, okay, so like, you know, are we sure we can't figure this out? And they're like, no. And it's like, okay, like, you know, the person that stands up, and the judge was like, okay, so like, you know, basically this is a hung jury, and everybody like stands up super fast, and I'm being rushed out of the door, and I'm waiting for like a guilty or a not guilty. So I'm like, what is going on? Like, what is the verdict? Like, is he guilty? Is he not guilty? And essentially they wind up bringing me back into the DA's office, and she's like, okay, let me sit you down and explain this to you. She's like, basically, this is what happened, and they couldn't come to a decision, but it's okay. Like, we'll go at it again. We'll come back stronger the next time, and we'll make sure that it's right the next time. So at this point, I'm just sobbing, because this has been a year and a half of my life where I'm constantly having to be in front of him to testify. I couldn't even like tell you what my social life was like at that point, because like I couldn't even go, you know, to a party without somebody asking me what was going on, or like seeing something in the newspaper and wanting to know more information. So like I was just done at this point. And at that exact moment, one of the secretaries walks in, and she's like, hey, you might want to go outside, because we have a victim's advocate that works at our courthouse as well as the DA, and essentially their job is to just kind of walk me through everything that's going on. So she's the person who is like explaining all this to me, and the secretary walks in, and she's like, hey, you need to go outside. And she's like, can't you see, like, I was literally sobbing. So she's like, can't you see, like, I'm in the middle of something. I have to, like, I can't go outside right now. She's like, no, you really need to go outside, both of you. And she meant me too. And I was like, okay. So we go walking outside, and the entire jury is standing outside the courthouse wanting to talk to me. And the victim advocate just looks at me, and she's like, I have literally, in like the 35 years I've been here, have never, ever in my career seen this. She's like, I don't even know what to say. So she walks me up to the jury. They're all sobbing. They're like, we're so sorry. We're so sorry. We wanted to say he was guilty, but there was one guy in the jury specifically, and he came up to me, and he was crying, and he's like, I had a question, and as a juror, they can't just like raise their hands and be like, hey, I have a question. So because that one question was so stuck in his mind that he didn't have an answer to, he couldn't in his moral compass say that this guy was guilty. He couldn't definitively say it. Like that was his moral, and like, that's fine. Like, I don't hold any grudges about about anything in the way that things happened. Obviously it was really, really, really hard, but right. We specifically had two women who were like, we didn't care what this guy would have said to us. Like we knew not even like half a day into this that this guy was guilty. They're like, just by looking at his demeanor, by the things that were like, being said in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. So they're like, there's nothing that this guy was ever going to do to change our minds. Like we knew for sure, like he was guilty. But obviously we can't change his mind either. So that's essentially what a hung jury was. So what was funny was those two jurors wound up meeting with the district attorney's office to let them know exactly what they had to like clarify and expand upon, or like what that guy's question was, just to make it so super crystal clear about like where people were, because what got confusing was there are so many people in my house. We had 7 siblings. My mom was one of 6 children. So like when they were talking about people up on, the floor, when they were talking, they were getting confused. So like we like made it more clear the second time around. Okay, this is the grandma. Okay, this is the sibling. Okay, this is the, so just kind of like make it a little bit more clear of who we were talking about. And, the second trial that we had, which we went through literally the entire process all over again. And the second trial that we had, we literally walked out of the courthouse when, they were charged with what they had to do, the jury. And the DA was like, I don't know, this might take a while. This might not take a while. I don't really know what's going to happen. So we walk out and we go to this restaurant. We're sitting down. We're not even like, we just got our food maybe for 2 minutes, and his phone rings and he's like, oh no, he's like, it's too fast. Because typically, statistically speaking, when the jury comes back very quickly, it's more often than not a not guilty verdict. So they came back, in his words, too quickly. So we go running back in and we sit down, and he was found guilty on every single charge that they had brought against him for the second time. So thankfully, like, the end result was worth it. But man, when I tell you the journey to get there was a journey, like it was a journey.
It's unbelievable to me. So what were the charges, and what was the sentence that he ended up getting?
So this is interesting. I didn't know this until I obviously had to go through it myself, which is what I love so much about doing the advocacy work and the education about this. So when somebody is charged with rape or corruption of a minor or molestation, whatever it is, which those were a bunch of his charges as well, your state will say, okay, there's a charge for rape here. In the state of Pennsylvania, whatever it is, whatever your state is, because every state, it varies by state. They'll say, okay, so the charge of rape carries a term of 2 to 4 years or 2 to 5 years or whatever it is for that particular charge. And then corruption of a minor carries a term for 1 to 5 years, whatever it is. So it's kind of like a sliding scale. So which is why it's so hard to not to convict, but like to get, really lengthy prison sentences for people who do this, is because each individual charge typically will carry anywhere from 1 to X amount of years on that one specific charge. So you can have 2 people who do literally the same exact thing. They can mirror themselves and what they do to a person, and go in front of a judge and go to sentencing and have 2 completely opposite sentences. And like the one guy can walk away with time served because of X, Y, and Z, and the other guy can go to jail for 30 years. It's what's so broken about the system right now is like there isn't a definitive like, okay, if you do this one thing, this is what's going to happen. Exactly. Right. And I feel like that kind of is an issue because people aren't able to say like, okay, well, like, and I'm sure it's not just for there were incest charges. Obviously, there were incest, corruption of a minor, rape, all of those things that kind of go into that. But it's not just like he did this to you. Here's his sentence. It's what was the charge specifically? Mm-hmm. How many years does that little charge carry? And then like where on that scale are we going to put him?
That's so crazy. And so yes. You're right. So incredibly broken. So where did he end up falling on the scale? What was his prison sentence?
So he would max out at 16 years. He could get up to 16 years. And what that means is they have to serve a certain percentage, and again, it varies by state and like depending on the prison system that they're in, they have to serve a certain percentage of their stay before they would be eligible for parole. And then when they're up for parole, they essentially have to go in front of a board. And I had the opportunity to write into this board, and then he has an opportunity to also speak to this board about why he should get out. And then we have, you know, a stance on why he should stay in. So he went up for parole 3 times, and then he was denied parole those 3 times. And when they deny it, they essentially extend his prison stay for another year. And then you have to go back again and do the parole thing. So and again, I didn't know because I hadn't gone through it, but like that was another thing that I really didn't anticipate. Basically, you have to plead your case again and again and again, even after they're convicted. Yeah, because you have to make sure that they stay in there, and you have to like say why it is that you wouldn't want this person to get out. So it's kind of like this like cycle where it never like really ends in a way. But I also don't, I like kind of like walk on eggshells as I say that, because I don't want that to like scare away anybody from prosecuting their abuser. What I'm trying to do is be as real and realistic about what the process is like, so that when somebody is at the point where, you know, I was at where it's like, okay, enough is enough, or like, you know, I am going to come forward with this, they are armed with all the information that they need to like know that this is coming, because I had no idea. And it wasn't until after, you know, he was sentenced that I got like my first letter from the victim advocate office for Pennsylvania that said like, hey, he's coming up for parole. And then, you know, this was years later. So I had no idea. Like, it wasn't even something that was like really brought up. Like, I knew from my victim advocate, like they said, oh, hey, we're going to put you on, you know, like this victim advocate basically like newsletter thing. And it's like, oh, okay. And I was like, you know, kind of what is that? And it's like, oh, you can at any time in point that he has to like transition jails or prisons or whatever. Or if he, basically if anything happens to him, they have to notify me, is basically what it was.
Right.
It just never even occurred to me like, oh, okay, one of those things is going to be parole. So,
right.
What's great about what happened the last time he came up for parole, though, was they have like certain courses and things that they have to do, like responsibilities, we'll just call them, when they're actually in jail, that they have to hit, like milestones, to be able to go in front of a board and say, hey, listen, like I've done all these things. Can you let me out now? He literally did none of the things, like literally none of the things. And in addition to not doing any of the things, he was also doing like other things that were also like bad within the prison system. So he not only was denied parole the very last time he came up for parole, they sent me a letter that was like, hey, listen, we're not doing this to you anymore. We're going to indefinitely deny his parole. So he's going to max out. Like he's not even going to get another chance at this point to go to the board to say, hey, I think I should get out now.
Good. And it took the justice system that long to finally like give you that, which is so infuriating on so many levels.
I would imagine like the same is for like murder like situations. Like that family is going to be like essentially re-victimized anytime that the person would come up for parole. Like they would have to go in front of a judge or write a letter to say like, oh, hey, the person that killed my child or my, you know, my husband or whatever, like, hey, keep them in jail. Like, so like, you know, there's a lot of broken pieces to the whole judicial system.
And it's like ripping that wound wide open for that person all over again. I can't imagine. So he did 16 years total is what he's maxing out at.
He will max out at 16 years. Yeah. There's no possible way he could get out before that. And
that 16-year mark is coming up soon, correct?
It is. Yes.
How are you feeling about that?
It's a lot of emotions. It's sooner than I want it to be. It's, you know, I don't ever want to live my life in fear because I did that for too long, right? So like I wasted too much of my life fearful of him. So I never want that to be like a thing that I continue to do. It's hard, obviously, because I don't know at what mental capacity he's going to be at when he gets out. You know, it's kind of like when you get a PFA order against somebody who's been like, you know, into like domestic violence issues or you know, it's protection from abuse order. So it's essentially a piece of paper that a judge has said, you know what, you have a pretty good reason to be afraid of this person. We're going to say that they can't contact you. They can't live within a certain range of you. And if they do, they're immediately going to go to jail. I did find out from like the victims board that like when he's like up for getting out, I am going to have like an opportunity to kind of do the same thing that I did at sentencing, which is going to kind of essentially give me like, I don't want to call it like a mini PFA, but it's essentially like the same kind of rules. It's like, okay, I can say to a judge like, hey, listen, I don't want him living. I want you to say he can't live within like 200 miles of me, that he can't contact me or my siblings or like, you know, whatever it is. You know, obviously they're adults now, so, you know, they're not children. So I can't really say what I would want for other people that are in my family, but I can certainly say what I would want for myself. And that's all fine and dandy, but at the end of the day, it is just a piece of paper. And, you know, if he wanted to find me, I'm sure that he could. And, you know, I don't know, like, you know, what does this guy have to lose at this point because he's been in jail for so long? So those things are scary. Like, I'm going to be very real with you guys. Like, it's scary because you don't know. You don't, and that's the thing. You don't know what is going to happen, and you don't know what they're going to be thinking and what rational kind of mindset that they're going to have, or, you know, if they are revengeful, or maybe they're not, and maybe they're just going to like kind of try to live their lives, you know, wherever. The nice thing about the victim advocacy people, like what they do too. So like when he gets out, he is going to be a registered sex offender. So I will like, and he's going to have an address on file, like, you know, when he gets out. So I'm going to know where he is at all times, you know, but again, that's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, I mean, he could say he's here, but is he really here? Like, we don't know. But, you know, I think that I'm going to try my very best to not live the rest of my life fearful of somebody that I had been fearful as a child. You know, I have my own children now. I've got 2 beautiful girls. I have a flourishing, very successful career as an author. I have an amazing husband. The last thing I want to do is spend the rest of my life like in like a, you know, like a crab shell or something, like just like afraid to come out and do anything. But, you know, at the same time, I have to be realistic and say like, okay, there is a possibility he might try to reach out to me, and what I'm going to do at that time, I don't know. But hopefully it never happens. And hopefully, you know, I don't have to ever deal with anything like that.
Does he know, do you know if he knows about the book?
I don't know if he knows for sure, because I literally have never contacted him after sentencing. Like, that was literally the last time that I saw him. So I don't know for sure. However, what I love, my favorite kinds of emails come from people within the prison system. So I know for a fact that my book is like in the jail systems, because people will write to me and be like, oh my God, I read your book. You know, I'm in jail, like, you know, after they got out or whatever, and like write me letters. And it's like, you know, I saw that you had your address in the back of your book, and I just wanted to write to you because, like, you know, it meant a lot to me because, like, that's why I'm in jail. Like, you know, I was also abused as, you know, a child, and I went the wrong path, and I did drugs, and then I wound up robbing this place. So like, they have their own stories, and it's interesting to think that he maybe has come across it, or like at the very least seen somebody else reading it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yep.
So I want to go back really quickly because I know how amazing your marriage is and how wonderful the story is of you two connecting. When you had your boyfriend in high school, and you were close with their whole family, were you guys how did he approach being intimate with you? Like, was that a hard line for you to cross because of what you were going through at home?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I actually get that one a lot. And I really like talking about it because I feel like it's one of those taboo things, again, that people just don't want to bring up in conversation, especially when I do like public speaking events. So this is like a really nice, intimate way to talk about this. For me personally, and I like to preface it by saying it that way because literally everybody who has gone through anything even remotely similar as the same as me is always going to like heal in a different way and react in a different way to then what I'm doing. So just because like something does it or is a trigger for me doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a trigger for you and vice versa. So for me personally, I think, and like, you know, not to get like, cause I don't like to be like too re-triggering when I do things like this, but like, I think because of the intensity of what I had to go through when I was like being victimized, I do not relate the two things in my mind. Like being loved is very different for me, what in a body reaction, in an emotional state, than it ever will be compared to what had happened to me. So I
Right.
don't relate the two things. So when it came to intimacy, that was love, and that was a safe place, and that was, my husband now at the time. So like it's different, and it's something that I have control over, and it's something that I enjoy, and that's fun. Whereas the other thing is something I had no control over, and like just all the feelings that come with that, and you not having a say in it. So I think that for a lot of people who do have that problem in associating the two things, it's actually not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because what I say to people is, do you really not like sex? Because that's not the issue. The issue isn't the sex part with your partner. That's not what's the problem. The problem is you're having an issue dissociating what had happened with the feelings that you're getting. So like what is good about it is it can be fixed. You can go to behavioral therapy. You can talk to somebody, a therapist, a counselor, and you can work through the feelings and the emotions and the literal physical reaction you get because you're associating those two things. Like that's a fixable thing. Like you don't have to live your life or the rest of your life not liking sex or not wanting sex. Like that's something that can absolutely be worked on in a behavioral setting.
Yeah, it's really powerful to like hear you knowing what you've gone through, talk about it in such a like strong and clear way. And I know that you've done so much of your own healing and that you're, an advocate now and speak publicly so much of it, but it's really powerful to hear someone who's gone through it talk about it in such a powerful way.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's, taken me quite a few years to get here. Like I wasn't always like this. I remember my first speaking event, like right out the gate, was kind of on accident. My college professor, like we had to write a paper, and I think the one psychology class that I was in had brought up topics of child abuse. So naturally I was going to write about my own experience within that paper. And that was kind of the first time I ever publicly let somebody else know outside of my family, like, and very close friends, like what was going on, because it was just my college professor. So she come to me at the end of the semester and she's like, hey, I know just from the papers you've written all semester that like you have been through some stuff. And I think that it would be really awesome if you're up to it to come to the courthouse with me, because they're having basically like a seminar on literally all walks of life that have to do with child abuse. So like when I say literally everybody, like there were funeral directors there, because that happens sometimes like with abuse situations. It was the clerks, it was the police officers that work within the court system. So it was literally everybody. And she was like, I think that this would be really great. And so I got to this, this meeting, and it was my first time speaking out loud about what had happened to me, not in front of a jury. And it was terrifying because like the entire time like that I was ever speaking this out loud, it was always to like my counselor, which was obviously a very safe place, or in the courtroom, which was also obviously felt unsafe, like because he was there, but in a way safe because like there were police officers standing right there, and like my support system was there. So this was the first time that I had like talked out loud about it to anybody that was just like kind of like a random stranger. And I remember ending my speech and like physically just like looking down at the table because I didn't like know what to expect. And like the entire room just like erupted, and like they stood up and they were clapping and they were like running up to me and hugging me. And like, I think it was just like such a great moment for me because it made me feel like just so justified in like what had all happened, because like these were strangers, like they didn't owe me anything. They didn't have to say I did a great job and like help them on their journey to do anything. And literally from that one meeting, I had several emails afterwards of like people saying like, okay, hey, I'm working on this kind of legislation that like, seals minors cases if they have been, sexually victimized. Like, would you help me write something on this? And hey, would you help me do this kind of legislation? So it kind of just snowballed from there.
That's incredible. I mean, it's like you really took your story and your pain and what you went through and turned it into like being a fucking superhero. And it's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I had some superheroes in my life. So, if people pick up my book and they read it and they feel that way about me, like that's awesome. Like, that's kind of the goal. Is I feel like going through court is just such an intricate, horrible thing if you're not really prepared to like know what's going to happen. And for me, like I just naturally have anxiety. Like I have anxiety. I know that as an adult now. I have social anxieties and whatever. So not knowing what to expect is like the worst situation to put me in, because it's like I kind of need to know, like on at least like a little scale, like, okay, what am I going to get out of this, or like what's going to happen, like, so even if I just was able to put that tool out there for somebody else who maybe has anxiety, like, okay, good, like that's amazing.
Yeah, totally. What are some of the biggest things that Mark, who is your husband, is able to do for you in support of, you know, what you've gone through? Because obviously, like, as healed as you are, there's things that have come up over the years. And I know that he's really been a huge support system for you. So what are some of the like biggest things that he's been able to do so that people listening can know if they have a partner that's dealt with that, or if they're trying to teach their partner how to help them, some advice on that?
Yeah. So actually a lot of like my TikToks that have gone viral are the ones that include my husband in them, because in some way he's like doing something to de-escalate me, or like I'm giving them an example of like what happens when I am triggered. Triggers are different for every person. Again, it could be a smell of something, or just a feeling of like kind of dread because you have seen some like the way a person looks or something. So triggers are good because they're telling you that danger is approaching, but they're bad because they tend to linger, especially after that trauma has already passed. So the biggest thing that Mark does for me is communication, really, because I feel like as somebody who kind of hyper focused on my studies when I was younger, I tend to in a way shut down when I feel triggered, because I'm used to zoning out, and I'm used to just like kind of closing everything else off and focusing on just like one thing. So because I'm not in school anymore, the one thing could be literally just sitting and watching TikTok for like he'll know now like when I'm being triggered before I even realize that I'm doing it, because he's like, hey, 4 hours have gone by, you're still reading that book, or you're still on TikTok, or you're still cleaning. Like, are you good? Like, what's going on here? Like, you're obviously like dealing with something. So just having a partner that is able to not only also identify what your triggers are, but to help you back off the ledge when you're feeling that way is super, super important. He knows now like what words to say if I'm feeling like, if I wake up in the middle of the night with a nightmare, what, like, he knows that, like, you know, holding me really close. I don't even have to ask him anymore. Like if I wake him up and I'm like, hey, I think I heard something, he already knows that I'm already like thinking the crazy things in my head, that somebody's broken into my house. Are my kids safe? He will literally just get up, walk the entire perimeter of the house, come back and go to bed. Like it's not even a question anymore. So I think it's just like at some point, you as a person are going to know what's going to de-escalate you the most. And it's just communicating that to your partner so that they're on the same page as you. So that like, when you're like, hey, you know, I'm feeling kind of triggered right now. You know, maybe your trigger is to like, you know, eat an ice cream bar because it's really, really cold and it's going to like, you know, kind of take your mind off things. Or like, you know, once you know what your things are and like, they can just help you with that. It's just amazing. It just helps it like go away so much faster because you're not working at it alone.
Yeah, and I think that's with any trauma. I mean, I have Tay do that with me too. Like he knows my triggers really well, and he knows what I need when they happen.
Right.
So I think with any trauma, you know, for people that are listening, not just with something that's regarding sexual abuse, like it's any trauma trigger that comes up. It's really important to have a partner, a parent, anyone that's in your life, a friend that can help you identify them and communicate around them and be able to like assist when they happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like, again, it's like something that they don't really teach you in school is like how to properly communicate. Because like when I say, hey, communicate with the person, like sometimes like I can see people's like faces just kind of glaze over. It's literally like figure out in your head what works for you, and then tell the people that you love the most who are around you, who are supportive of you, tell them that thing. If it's like getting you a lemon wedge, if it's going out, you know, and going for a walk, if it's literally leaving you alone, like if you just need your like, you know, your peace and quiet, like whatever it is that works for you, just figure that part out first. Cause that's the hardest part. Cause sometimes we don't know. And then go from there, and then just let the people around you know what they need to do or know what they need to say so that, you know, it helps you.
Yeah, dude, if we would learn about that and taxes and, you know, all the things
Just
in
anything.
school,
Like, yeah, that's real
life would be so different.
Yeah.
Okay, my love, you are such a freaking powerhouse of a woman. Please tell everybody where they can follow you and where they can get Spilled Milk, but also all of your other books that you have.
Yeah, sure. So follow me on TikTok. It's Kale Randis. That's my pen name. I actually wrote it that way for a reason because I had done some research and found that male victims specifically will not pick up a book if it's not also written by like a male author because they feel like they can't relate in that way, especially when it comes to like topics of abuse. So I wrote it like, you know, for the male and female audience. And actually a lot of authors do that. E.L. James and stuff like that's why they initial their names instead of like having their name on there. It's a marketing thing. So they can go to any social media and find me on Kale Randis on Instagram, on TikTok. And then they can just go to kalerandis.com if they want to get like an autographed copy or whatever. And I just want to say thanks for having me here on Wellness Wednesday, which is something I also do on Instagram every Wednesday.
Yes.
So like I just get so many questions about this subject that like I've made it a point to on every Wednesday we have a Wellness Wednesday and people writing questions to me like via the stories and we just chat and we have a good time. And what I love is that usually one person winds up bringing a question up that like somebody else had the question. They just didn't want to ask it. So like, they're like, oh, I'm really glad that person asked that question. So it's like a really nice, helpful, healing community that I've built up and I really love it. And I appreciate you having me on here so much to, again, further my audience and, you know, just let people know that they're not alone.
Well, girl, I am forever indebted to you for coming into my life and pushing me over the self-publishing cliff and mentoring me through one of the scariest processes of my life. So I'm so happy and honored to have you on here. I just think the world of you. And Thank you for coming on and sharing your truth, girl.
Of course, anytime.
The biggest thank you to Miss Kelly for coming on the show today. Please, guys, go pick up a copy of Spilled Milk. Please go follow her. She is such a wonderful, wonderful human, and I am honored to know her and call her a friend. Next week, you guys, we are going to lighten it up a little bit. We've been getting into some heavy topics for the past couple weeks, and we are going to have a fun fucking episode next week. Whitney Miller, who is an awesome relationship coach, sex coach, like all the things. We talk about polyamory, monogamy, cheating, what it's like to be in a relationship for a long time, keeping your sex life spicy, using toys in the bedroom. I mean, we're covering it all, you guys. So I am so excited for next week's episode. It's going to be a fucking fun one. And in other exciting news, we are about a week away from bringing you the new merch. I cannot wait for you guys to see it and make sure you're keeping an eye on the Instagram page because it will sell out fast. We only got limited numbers on each item. Also, we posted our new giveaway for April. You have until April 20th, and all you have to do is make a video explaining what Eat, Pray, FML or FML Talk has done for you in your life. There are examples on the Eat, Pray, FML Instagram. There's some examples on my Instagram that I've been posting. So whatever you choose to do, however you want to take the challenge on and get out of your comfort zone. The videos that I've been seeing so far are fucking amazing. And my FMLers, you guys continue to just put a smile on my face and surprise me every time. As always, make sure you are subscribed so you never miss an episode. Keep up with us at FML Talk Podcast so you don't miss any of the behind the scenes goodies. Make sure you enter that giveaway by April 20th. The 2 winners that we're picking are going to get an awesome freaking gift bag, including a $50 gift card and some goodies from Thrive Cosmetics and Sugar & Kush. I will see you all next week with Whitney Miller for all things sex and relationships. I cannot wait. I will be bringing the bottle of tequila. Until next time, guys, cheers.